Alrighty. Hello, hello. Thank you all for joining us for our very first History Collective. I'm really excited to be with you all tonight. Our program is going to be amazing, and I'm so honored that we have each of our featured guests here today. My name is Taylor Roden, and I'm the Community Events Manager here at Historic Seattle. For those of you who don't know, our mission at Historic Seattle is saving meaningful places to foster lively communities. With that, we definitely want to say that we know that our properties and our programs occupy unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples. This acknowledgement is definitely not a substitute for developing relationships with Indigenous communities or for honoring Indigenous stories as we share our collective history. But this is a first step in recognizing the people whose land we occupy. This acknowledgement is borrowed from the City of Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture, and our organization is working on developing our own. So you'll hear that from us pretty soon in our upcoming programs. Before we dive into tonight's program, I have a few housekeeping items for you all. First, I want to thank our sponsors for making our education programming possible. Let me show you our lovely sponsor slide. Specifically, we want to thank Bassetti Architects and Bennett Properties. And I also want to extend a big thank you to HistoryLink for partnering with us. Major kudos, HistoryLink, for creating this awesome collection of self-guided tours. And if you all haven't had a chance to take today's tour or any of the other tours, I strongly encourage that you do that. I did that earlier this week with my colleague Naomi, who's also on here with a Historic Seattle name, and we had a great time. If you did make it to the CID self-guided tour, we definitely would love to know that. So please let us know via the chat. Actually, we're going to be doing a lot with the chat tonight, and I'll get to that part in just a moment. But before I do that, I also want to share with you all that my other stellar colleague, Eugenia Wu, will act as our facilitator tonight. Eugenia is going to guide us through tonight's discussion. In a quick overview, I know I sent the reminder out, but we're going to hear from Dr. Marie Wong first. Marie actually wrote the self-guided tour for HistoryLink, and she's going to give us an overview of the tour for those of us who weren't able to take it. Then we're going to get into our panel discussion, and I'll let Eugenia introduce each one of our panelists. And at the very end, we'll have a Q&A. So please send your questions to me via the chat, and then I will share them with Eugenia, and she'll curate the Q&A portion. We have about 10 or so minutes for that, just to give you all a heads up at the end. And the last thing that I want to say before I turn it over to Eugenia is please just keep in mind that our points of view and our opinions do differ. And that's a good thing, we think. And regardless, we want you all to make sure that you're being respectful so that this can remain a safe space for learning and listening and exploration. And we do not tolerate sexism or racism, homophobic comments, discriminations, insult, anything of the sort. Naomi and I will be monitoring the chat to ensure that this does remain a safe space for tonight's discussion. So if that all sounds good to you, it sounds good to me. And I'd love for you all to join me in welcoming Historic Seattle's Director of Preservation Services, Eugenia Wu. Eugenia, please join us.
Great, thank you, Taylor, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening. Clearly the photo that you see on your screen is a few years old because I've got COVID hair now. Anyway, we have a great slate of speakers who represent different perspectives in the Chinatown-International District. I'll be the moderator this evening. We'll begin with an overview of the community by Dr. Marie Wong, and then we'll hear from 4 other distinguished speakers. I'm sure many of you will have questions for our speakers, and we look forward to having a robust discussion about one of Seattle's most unique and historic neighborhoods. The Chinatown ID's history and cultural significance are recognized by its designation as a local historic district called the International Special Review District, established in 1973. It is also listed on the National Register of Historic Places as the Seattle Chinatown Historic District, established in the mid-1980s. Without these historic district designations, the neighborhood would be a different place today. That's not to say that there are no pressures from development. There is a lot of that going on, given its proximity to downtown, public transit, and the sports stadia. How this change is managed is key, and we're so glad that there are people and organizations in the community who work hard every day to maintain and enhance the neighborhood's cultural relevance. We'll hear from some of them today. First up is Dr. Marie Wong. uh, aka Doc Wong, Professor Emeritus at Seattle University's Institute of Public Service, Asian Studies and Public Affairs. Marie's teaching and research interests are in urban studies, including housing, urban and architectural history, land use development, sustainability, and in Asian American studies. Her most recent publication, entitled Building Tradition, Pan-Asian Seattle and Life in the Residential Hotels, is a must-read and a great addition to your local history library. Marie has presented talks and conducted tours of the CID for historic Seattle in the past, and we're delighted that she joins us this evening. She developed the History Link tour of the CID. We hope you've had a chance to go online to view the tour. If not, we're sure you'll want to do so after hearing from Marie tonight. Marie, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Eugenia. First of all, I want to let everybody know how happy I am to have the opportunity to briefly talk with you about how the tour was developed. And I'm glad that there's so much interest in this, that there's so many people who wanted to join tonight to learn about the district, the tour, and to interact with a really great panel of speakers that will be able to tell you specifically how they engage in planning, community development, and preservation. In the 10 minutes that I have, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the information of why I was interested in doing this project in the first place, the tour parameters, the goals that I had for the tour, and also the role that I envisioned for all of the participants that would be involved in taking this tour. So, briefly stated, I guess the reason that I did the tour is because I really wanted to do it. I've been in Seattle for 32 years now, and becoming familiar with and interacting with the CID, whether it's on a volunteer basis, taking students into the district, learning about the nonprofits and for-profit businesses and corporations. It's been a long-term, I think, love affair with the neighborhood, learning about it and trying to figure out ways to enhance it, improve it, and preserve all of those things that make that district just incredibly special. The other thing is, it's amazing how much time a person can spend learning about one neighborhood. Eugenia had mentioned Building Tradition that just recently came out. Basically, I spent 14 years researching for the book, and I spent 20 years looking at buildings, land use issues, and most of all, learning from the community, because the community can share those deep roots that will indicate and enlighten you on the history of the neighborhood. But there's also this very real connection that residents, property owners, developers have with bridging what was history into contemporary development. So this is how you look at the history of the neighborhood, but also what's there right now. And I tried to incorporate that within the tour. So in developing it, the human aspect of these buildings and the neighborhood was really, really critical. In order to give someone an idea of the neighborhood that has no knowledge at all about it, I wanted to include a really brief history that looked at Asian American settlement, the CID, try to be as succinct as possible, but to also include some information on immigration and the laws that really started shaping how people lived and where they lived within the district. So that, with the program prospectus, I was charged with the task of looking at 24 stops with 6 to 8 descriptive sentences for each one of those stops. And I will tell you right now that it's really hard to keep a narrative succinct when there is so much that can be said about a single stop, and to try to limit the number that was included. So in some of the stops, you'll notice that they actually act as a node for the participant, where you may stand in one location and then kind of sweep along the intersection to take a look at what you can see if you're just standing in one area of an intersection. So that node may include 2 to 4 buildings, spaces within that single intersection. the goals of the tour, the stops reflect the history, and they also reflect the uniqueness of the Asian American community and contemporary development issues. So it provides a sample of building types and spaces that knit the community together. You'll experience those major building types. If you look in the district, so many of the buildings are either single room occupancy residential hotels, low-rise commercial buildings, so a single or two-story, community institutions that really served as the backbone of development for social community identity. Public art is everywhere within the district, landscaping, open spaces. So the tour, I was hoping to bring in aspects of all of these possibilities so that a participant would be able to engage with all kinds of different sites, not just structures. So the goal that I had in mind was to reflect on the stop, but also a place memory, something about the stop that you may look at it and think, well, the building is not all that wonderful, or why did you include this particular building? But that building also has a lot of in-depth history. It has a lot of place memory for the community. And I wanted to give you one example that looks at the northwest corner of the intersection of King and Maynard Avenue South. And with this, Taylor's going to help me with technology, for which I am incredibly grateful. But this reflects one of the stops that is in the tour. So this first image is of the Fuji Hotel building. And can everybody see this? I'm hoping.
Marie,
Yes.
I think we need a minute to screen share. Give us just a second.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
Okay, now we're up.
Ah, wonderful. Okay, what you're looking at here, this is the Fuji Hotel building. It was considered to be one of the luxury hotel buildings when it was constructed around 1890. It was the first hotel in the CID that had a dormitory style sleeping arrangement where the accommodations were not on the first floor of the building or the basement level of the building, but they were put on the second and the third levels of the building. And while we may think that that's not really that big of a deal, today maybe not, but then when this building was being used for the Fuji Hotel, this was a really big innovation. The building was purchased in 1899 by Chojiro Fuji. Originally, the name of the building was the Rainier Hotel. And if you could go to the second slide, please. Okay. With the Jackson Street regrade that takes place between 1907 and 1909 in the city, you as a building owner had the option to elevate your building if you wanted to, but you had to sign a release form with the city of Seattle that if something happened while they were doing the regrade, that you would not hold the city responsible for any kind of damage that would take place to your building. So with the Fuji, they literally elevated the structure. They did the regrade beneath it, and they had the opportunity to build an additional level or an additional story that was part of the basement, but now they had the opportunity to have a commercial space or commercial spaces that would take the place of that at-grade level. So if, let's see, if you could move to the third slide then. Okay, so as part of the Model Cities program that Seattle was a participant in, they were still looking for a site for a park. And this is a neighborhood that has always had a challenge that it has had the least amount of open space per capita of any of the neighborhoods in the city of Seattle. So in order to be able to find some kind of space that was going to give the residents who were living in residential hotels an opportunity to meet and to just get outdoors, they looked at the site that, again, this was the Fuji Hotel, but they looked at this as the site that was going to be used, that would require the demolition of what was low-income housing and the construction of the first phase of Hanghe Park. So when you go to the park and when you go to, on this tour, what you're looking at is this half-block expanse of Hanghe Park, but you're really looking at a park that was 37 years separated by phase 1 and phase 2. So what you're experiencing with all of these sites needs to include the voices of the community. And I'm going to say the voices of the community, both past and present. And most significantly, in thinking about the tour, we wanted to make sure that all of the stops were being evaluated by the CID stakeholders. So there were a number of organizations that kindly volunteered their time to take a look at these stops and to give us additions and any corrections that they would want to see. The fourth issue here for participant is that I wanted to establish a tour that would allow the participant to discover the CID as I know it, but to also develop their own avenue of curiosity and maybe even research of something that they find particularly compelling or interesting in the district. So this is a way that you can make something very personal so that you're looking at a connection that goes far beyond just that narrow parameter of the tour, and it becomes personal to the individual that is taking it. So hopefully I haven't used more than my 10 minutes. I'd like to turn this back to Eugenia, who is going to introduce our first and our next panel speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. As always, that was a fascinating look at the neighborhood. I know every time I hear one of Marie's talks, I learn something, and that's definitely the case today. So next up is Leslie Morishita, Real Estate Development Director at Interim CDA, a nonprofit affordable housing and community development organization created in 1969. With a focus on serving the API, or Asian Pacific Islander community, Interim CDA provides multilingual, culturally competent housing and community building services to those disenfranchised due to lack of English, low acculturation, and poverty. As Interim CDA's Real Estate Development Director, she leads efforts to find, buy, and develop real estate projects in the district to provide affordable housing for the community. Leslie, so question for you. In your work at Interim CDA, how have you seen affordable housing accessibility contributing to the CID's ongoing architectural and cultural preservation? Second question, please tell us about some of Interim's preservation projects involving former single room occupancy hotels, or SROs.
Okay, hello. So thanks, Eugenia. You already introduced Interim and kind of gave an overview of what I do, so I won't go over that. So as Eugenia said, I lead Interim's housing development efforts. And, I think in answer to the question, in my totally unbiased opinion, affordable housing accessibility contributes significantly to the architectural and cultural preservation of the International District neighborhood. And, for one, so when we redevelop a historic building for low-income housing, it enables us to leverage significant public resources, which is money, to make the historic preservation of the building possible. And then, we're doing so as a community-based organization with deep roots in the neighborhood and through a community development lens. So that means the restoration is done with care and love, and because it's our culture and our history, it's sacred. So beyond the renovation of the physical structure, we seek to keep the history of the buildings and their place in the community alive by telling their stories. I think Marie articulated the importance of the essential nature of keeping those stories alive for people who are there today. And in making a way for the building to continue to serve the community with needed affordable housing and more, we see this as continuing the legacy and spirit in which these buildings were created in the first place. So about some of our buildings, Interim has developed 6 buildings in the International District neighborhood. 2 are new construction, 4 were historic renovation projects. For 2 of the buildings, we did the Jihao Oak Tin, working with the Family Association in 1995, that was 30 years ago. And we also did the renovation of the Rex Hotel. These were both SRO buildings where we worked with the owners as a development consultant to help them get the public resources necessary to do those renovations. In 1994, Interim was able to purchase the NP Hotel, which is, it's an SRO building. It was an SRO building that the upper residential floors had sat vacant for decades because of the city's Ozark Fire Code ordinance. So the owners at the time were unable to afford to bring the residential levels up to the fire ordinance code. So everybody had to move out. So that building had been vacant for many years, except for the first floor, which was Maneki Restaurant, which is, I think it's the oldest Japanese restaurant in the area. Interim worked with the owner of step back. So we reconfigured the SRO rooms into 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and studios, and kept the second floor as SRO units because it was seen as an endangered building type. And working with Bob Hale, amazing historic preservation architect, the building was very lovingly restored and opened as low-income housing that continues to this day. And we worked with Kozo Nakayama, the then owner of the Maneki Restaurant, to help redesign the space and bring it up to current day codes. Interim contributed funds towards the renovation of the restaurant space and provided Maneki Restaurant with a long-term below market lease, as seeing the restaurant as a very integral part of the history of the building and important for the community. And so, and then we also worked with the Ringloop Museum to create a historic exhibit in the lobby that tells about the history of the building and its important role as an anchor for the historic Nihonmachi community. And then we also did the Eastern Hotel building, which is another historic SRO building that we purchased and renovated in 1998. It was all SRO buildings, all fully occupied at the time we purchased it. And we worked with the current residents to relocate them, and then they were all invited back when the renovation was completed. And the SRO rooms were reconfigured into studios, mostly studios and 1-bedroom units. There's one 4-bedroom unit. I love this story. There was a 4-bedroom unit that we created there because at the time we purchased the building, there was a very large Filipino family living there. They had 5 children and they were living in 3 adjacent SRO rooms. And they very much wanted to be able to continue living there after the renovation. So we created one 4-bedroom unit there so they could return, and they did. And then we also created 1 unit off the alley for Donnie Chin and the International District Emergency Center. For those who aren't familiar with Donnie Chin, we called him the guardian angel for the neighborhood. And he dedicated his life to seeing to the safety and the needs of everybody in the neighborhood. And in exchange for daily security patrols, we made this unit for him rent-free. And we knew the building would be better off with Donnie there. And to this day, that unit is still used by the International District Emergency Center rent-free. And also with a group of community volunteers, we created a historic exhibit in the lobby called the Carlos Bulosan Memorial Exhibit. And it pays tribute to the Filipino cannery workers or Alascaros and the Filipino labor movement for which the Eastern Hotel served as a backdrop. So I guess, so I go into all these details about the little stories of what we did beyond the physical structure, because so our approach to historic preservation is we really seek to uphold the historic integrity of the physical structure of the historic buildings and to center people and culture. and to adapt them to serve the needs of the community today. And in this way, the way we see it, we're paying homage to those who came before us and keeping their legacy alive. I'm sorry, I have no idea how much time that took.
That's great. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, sure.
The work that you do with Interim to provide affordable housing is so important. So it's really fantastic for the community. So next up is Tanya Wu. Give a little time for the little slide for her to show up. Great. So this is a good segue to our next speaker, Tanya Wu, whose family has owned a former single-room occupancy hotel for decades. Tanya Wu's family has a long history in the Chinatown ID, going back to her great-grandfather, who co-founded the Lucknow Musical Association. Respect for history, community, and the importance of giving back have been instilled in each generation of the family. Tanya, so your family has owned the Louisa Hotel since the 1960s. What are some of the rewards and challenges of long-term building ownership in the neighborhood? And also, please tell us about your experience taking on the rehabilitation of the Louisa.
As Leslie said, the biggest challenge for rehabbing all these old buildings is basically money. It's too expensive to bring all the buildings up to fire code, up to earthquake code, with the code constantly changing. That's why you see a lot of these buildings in Chinatown with the upper floors basically shuttered and abandoned and only having the first floor, which are sprinklered, fire safe and earthquake safe. And so my father, when I was young, I grew up in that building, the Louisa Hotel. I would play in the bakery, help eat the bread. And then when I was older, I spent all my days after school in my dad's office. He had all these hopes and dreams and plans for this building and how it could contribute to Chinatown. He had plans drawn up, but he just basically, the family, we could not afford it. Most of these buildings in Chinatown are owned by families who are older, and when you're in your 60s, 70s, and 80s, you don't want to take on a multi-million-dollar loan to upgrade your building. And so he was never able to do it. He passed away when I was really young. And so the building upper floors were abandoned. There was no electricity up there, but the ground floor was in use. And so many years later, on Christmas Eve of December 2013, the roof caught on fire on the western half of the building. And basically half the building had to be demolished. The alley wall was in danger of collapsing onto our neighbors. The top floor had collapsed onto the floors beneath it. The building could no longer be used. And so many of the businesses that were in the building were legacy businesses. They had to close their stores on the busiest shopping day in Chinatown of the year. And many of them couldn't go back in. They had to leave their things there. And basically, we had to decide, my family, whether we were going to rebuild, whether we had to sell the building or just shutter it and leave it there. And so we decided the next day that we were going to rebuild. And for a whole year, we worked on doing emergency stabilization of the building, saving the facade, and trying to save as much of the interior of the destroyed side as we could. And so it was quite a bit of a challenge because we very quickly had to apply for federal and state historic tax credits to help fund the whole rebuild. And we had such a tremendous outpouring of help from the city, the state, and from the community. And also the community also helped support all the businesses that had to close. And so through this process of, exploring the building right before demolition and getting it ready for it to be stabilized, I've learned so much about this building. And I learned so much about my father that I never really knew because he died when I was so young. Like just walking through the halls and imagining all the stories and all the people who had lived in these apartments. Basically, we found graffiti from World War II sailors who had docked here, graffiti from the USS Missouri, the USS Mercy, these different ships that were here. Sailors would come into the halls and hang out in the music halls and gambling areas. We found like secret passageways. We found perfume bottles and walls, coins and floors, notes, and all kinds of things from people who have been there before, calendars. And we wanted to tell these stories. We wanted to preserve these stories. So we saved as much as we could. And thanks to like all of the state and federal tax credits, we were able to save much of the woodwork, the trim, the doors, the stairs, and of course the facade. So this building was built in 1909, and one of the biggest challenges with having half of the building gone was having to recreate and replicate what used to be there. And so it took us 3 years to design and permit and to be able to find the funds to rebuild. And we were able to partner with a local family, the Gorder family, who really believed in workforce housing. And that was able to help so much with being able to bring in more people to live closer to the downtown Seattle core. And so we had an amazing time designing the building to look like it used to look, how the architects had intended to look. We restored the facade, we recreated the hallways, and during construction, the crews were in the basement. They took down a drywall and found these beautiful, well-preserved Prohibition era jazz murals. We were constantly learning so much about the history of the building. We had no idea there was a jazz hall that was in the basement. And we decided that we had to save these murals. And it was quite a fight, having to change the permits, having to change everything. But we thought this was a very important part of history that needed to be preserved. And it was like, and we just later discovered it's the only remnants left of jazz clubs in Seattle. And so biggest challenges turn out to be the biggest rewards. Being able to see the building now, we just opened last year, 2019 in June, to 84 units of workforce housing and ground floor retail. And it's just so amazing to be able to walk through the halls, and instead of seeing just pigeons and the red-tailed hawk that would hunt these pigeons, it's hearing laughter and seeing people. It's always so odd to walk around and see someone that you know, or having the halls filled with energy. It's the biggest reward, being able to put this building back instead of it being just a dark little hole where it was not being used. And so a lot of the challenges were basically trying to stay within budget, trying to find a budget for something, being able to, we never knew what was going to happen next to this building. During construction, we had a wall collapse because a wall that's 100 years old was definitely not going to be able to support something that we thought it would be. And so it was quite a rewarding challenge to be able to walk on the sidewalks, especially since we're seeing our businesses reopen. We had Susu and our Korean barbecue restaurant Bagel Pot open recently, our milk tea, and we're very excited to see Hong Kong restaurant open soon. And so it gives me so much joy to be able to walk down the street and see people lined up outside, enjoying the building, going upstairs to go home and be with their friends and family. Whereas in the past, this building was just empty and quite desolate. And so being a steward of this building has made me realize that this building is going to be here. It's been here for 100 years. It'll be here for another 100 years. We are going to come and go. But it's so important that we tell the stories of the people who came before us, all those people who worked so hard, who sacrificed, left their families to come here and work and send money back and bring their families over so that we can be here. We have to tell these stories, and we have to appreciate and honor their legacy and make sure that the future generations that come after us realize the sacrifices and the hard work and carry on these stories and be able to appreciate what happened. And so these buildings hold so much meaning, hold so much stories, tragedy, everything has to be remembered, has to be documented, and has to be carried on. Otherwise, it'll just be lost and it won't be there. And so it's very important that for the future generation to look at their family buildings and to hopefully do something to help save them and help bring them back to code. And it's very difficult, but hopefully there's a good support network and a good support structure that can help. And so as you see slowly, like in the news, some buildings have been experiencing fires and tragedy and not being able to be used. And so very slowly, I hope that, future generations will realize that they have to play the part in bringing these buildings back up to code and be able to carry on these stories.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you so much. So what a preservation success story that is. Thank you and your family for taking on such a challenging project. The Louisa Hotel project is also a recipient of Historic Seattle's Community Investment Award in 2020. Unfortunately, we weren't able to celebrate in person. We usually have a annual benefit where we recognize preservation projects. Hopefully we can all gather again next year. So our next speaker gives us an opportunity to look at the importance of small businesses in the CID. Karen Akata Sakata is the owner of the Busch Garden Restaurant and Bar, a legacy business that has been operating in the neighborhood since 1953. She and her husband purchased the business in 1996 from original owners Roy and John Seiko. Karen actually worked as a waitress at the Busch Garden when she was in high school, so her association with the business goes way back. Karen, many tourists and visitors to the CID miss or overlook that the district is a close-knit community of neighbors, business owners, artists, workers, etc. As the owner of a beloved staple, how have these relationships and community ties shaped the legacy of Busch Garden? And what does the future hold for the Busch Garden?
Okay, well, the legacy, for people who are new to Seattle, the restaurant started there in 1957 in that location, and it was huge. It was before the days of big hotels. It was before the days of very many any chains or things like, I think Dags was the local hamburger place. Dick's and Dags were the two places that were around, and it was it was a gathering place for of not just Japanese American community, but a lot of community events, because there were no large venues around, but this place could hold 300 to 400 people. It was the whole second floor plus the first floor, and it was designed originally to be very high end. There was small rooms that people could have business meetings, so there were phones in all the rooms where people could sit down, have lunch, and have their business meeting and eat a great lunch and lunch or dinner. And it was really an amazing place. There were a whole fleet of, I worked as a bus girl. I started working as a bus girl. So that there was a lot of high school students that all worked there. Our job was just to clean the rooms. And then there was a lot of waitresses and down in the kitchen, a lot of the chefs from Japan were all working down there. It was an exciting place to be. It was like a really small town where, Japanese community, Japanese culture could, we could be in a small village pretty much. I think I remember it also as a place where my family would gather. A lot of our Mother's Day events were held there at the restaurant, because then everybody could bring their whole family and everybody could eat, but nobody having to do the work. But the place holds a lot. It's been Busch was a place where a lot of community events were held, fundraisers were held. I know the JCL would hold their events there. Community, the Lions Club would had, I think they had an event that went every Thanksgiving Eve, and it was called Reno Night, and people from all over the community would come. Business people, it was a good place for those long afternoon business lunches. It was a place where the Japanese community, maybe the Japanese dance group would hold their dance recital there, or people would have weddings, or it was after funeral gatherings, people would, join and share there too. So it was a place where, it filled a lot of roles in family lives on a regular basis. Is where, people would go on their prom nights, special prom nights. There were limousines that would pull up, and the waitresses all wore kimonos. It was very, very fancy. And I know it's just a place where people go even before events, after events, and even up until it was last open. I feel like people would come in for meetings. They would discuss or plan or prepare, or after a meeting, they would come in and talk about what happened at the meeting. Just it was a place for a community to really, really connect, and over generations, really. We had, 2 or 3 generations of people that have been through there. We would get visitors that had come for the first time from Texas or wherever, and they would end up visiting with us there, and making a connection. So I think that we had a lot of regulars that have been there for a couple generations. We have people that are brand new that found it for the first time. And then, maybe we've even had, somebody reserved it for an event for karaoke, and then they ended up coming back pretty much year after year after year. So they've seen the changes and become part of the Bush community for 60 regular years. It was kind of their thing to do when they came to Seattle. So when there was a Japanese artist that came from Japan, and she had a concert here in Seattle, and she came to Busch Garden for dinner, and it's just been a great gathering place. Uncle Bob Santos, for those of you who don't know, he was considered the mayor of the International District, Chinatown International District, and Uncle Bob was a regular. There were many electeds would show up every once in a while and join us. A lot of community organizations, I know, as part of the Japanese Community and Cultural Center, and a lot of our meetings after meetings and meetings before meetings were held there. Bush has been a place for political activism, I would say, too. Ruth Wu, I know that she used to come for lunch and have, I don't know how many meetings very often to talk about strategy, how to organize, and strategy in the community to work to get what we needed in the community. So it's a place where they, I don't know, back in the day, the Torchlight Parade in part of Seafair, they would organize and plan what the floats, I don't know if they used to have floats during the Torchlight Parade, and they would even plan how they're going to decorate those, and they had design it and plan it, and all the people would gather that participated in building it. So there was a lot, it's just meant so much to people in the community. So the building has been sold. The building got sold in 2016, and the goal of the developers is they want to build a 17-story building there. And so they're still going through their process. So nothing has happened yet, but the COVID, needing to close because of COVID, it's been difficult to figure out a way to try and reopen, especially because karaoke was our, is what we've become known for. And so anyway, in terms of where we're going next, because of the plans for the building to be demolished, that we had to look for another place. So luckily we're asked to be a part of the new place that Interim is building, Uncle Bob's place right across the street from the new, and we're looking forward to when that gets developed. And at this time, because we've been closed for a while, you know, in terms of the future, we're thinking that we're going to have to close our doors temporarily until the time comes to. We haven't announced it, formally announced it, but that's the direction we're kind of going in. So I think, I don't know. Sorry, I'm not. I think that's. Is that enough, Eugenia?
Yeah, that's great, Karen. Thank you. It's as I think you can see a pattern of all the speakers before you. It's all about the stories, and the Busch Garden is so much about the people. And so 67 years is a remarkable run for a restaurant and bar, and 24 of those under your helm. And as we heard Karen discuss, the Busch Garden is so much more than a restaurant and bar. It's a community gathering place. We know there are challenging times for small businesses, and we wish you all the best as you reinvent this beloved place. Karen, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So our final speaker, this is the operations director at the Friends of Little Saigon is the social, economic, and cultural hub of the Vietnamese community in the Puget Sound region. The neighborhood is also a vital part of the Chinatown ID. Friends of Little Saigon was established in 2011 at the start of massive redevelopment in Little Saigon. Its mission is to preserve and enhance Little Saigon's cultural, economic, and historic vitality. So Valerie, thank you for joining us this evening. So Little Saigon has a very different vibe, look, and feel than its neighbors, Chinatown and Japantown. One of the notable differences being fewer housing options and many, many small businesses. How does this impact the culture and preservation of the neighborhood? Also, there's a new city park proposed for the neighborhood. What impact do you think the new park will have in this?
Great, thanks, Eugenia. So as you all may know, Little Saigon is predominantly a commercial business district. So relatively fewer residential buildings than the Chinatown, Japantown side of the neighborhood. There's numerous restaurants, grocery stores, professional services, cafes, and more in Little Saigon. It is seen as a cultural home for many Vietnamese Americans across the region and the state. So as a business district, Little Saigon has a solid set of cultural roots. The businesses are a huge contributor to the Vietnamese American culture in the area. The businesses provide culturally and linguistically appropriate goods and services to people, and people come from across the region and feel like this is their cultural home. And as you suggested, there are some challenges that come along with being predominantly a business district. Customers are passing through, stopping by for a shopping trip, a quick meal, a service, and then they just leave. So without much of a residential base until recently, the neighborhood has sometimes been an afterthought. It takes a lot of deliberate and concerted effort to preserve a place and community when you don't have a strong residential base. So it's been a challenge to get community activated and engaged in the neighborhood, especially if people don't live there and it's not part of their everyday experience. So Friends of Little Saigon, we work hard to engage our small businesses, although they're already very strapped for time and have a hard time committing to showing up for activities outside of their workplace. That's not to say that there aren't extremely vocal and active business owners or employees in the neighborhood. It's just that much harder. So having a residential base is extremely important for cultural preservation. It's important for the businesses to have residential customers in close proximity. It's also important for the neighborhood to have people of different generations living here and interested in the well-being of the community in the long term. And as we know from the elections, it's very important to have a residential base for voting in local elections, which helps to shape the policies that either preserve or displace communities. So that's my answer to your first question. And related to the park, hopefully you all know that there's a park coming into Little Saigon. It's on King Street, across the street from Lamb Seafood. So we're really excited about this park. It's been a number of years in the making with a lot of community input. And our hope is that in the near future, when we can all gather again, it'll be a place for community to come together and host events. It'll be a nice retreat for pedestrians to be tucked away from traffic and cars. It's going to be a place for residents in the neighborhood and employees to take a break from their shifts and hang out with each other. And we've taken a lot of effort to incorporate and celebrate Vietnamese American culture in the design and public art in the park, and we'll bring together the various cultures in the neighborhood. And hopefully our intent is that the park makes a statement that Little Saigon is an established place and that we're here to stay, and it's a place worthy of stopping and a destination, not just a place to pass through quickly.
Great, thank you, Valerie. So there are a lot of exciting things happening in the future of Little Saigon, and we look forward to seeing all the great progress. Actually, one of Historic Seattle's property that offers affordable housing, Victorian Row Apartments, is just going to be right next to the park, so that's exciting. We just heard from 5 remarkable women who contribute so much to the Chinatown ID. At this point, I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. I know some of you have been typing your questions in the chat, and so I'm going to read them out in the order that they came in. And so in terms of looking at the time, we may or may not get to all of them. If we don't, then we can be sure to still somehow respond to your questions. So the first question is from John McWilliams, who asked, the mid-20th century Bank of America building on King Street has abstract ornamentation on the facade. Does anyone know if the architect solicited input from community stakeholders on what would be an appropriate expression of their aspirations? Are the ornaments intended to symbolize anything in particular? Let's see. Marie, do you know much about that building? So definitely the building was built and it predated the establishment of the International Special Review District. So it would not have been reviewed by the board.
I have my doubts that there was any kind of interaction on the design of the building with community input. They just weren't at a position to do that. What I was thinking of when you were mentioning the building, though, is that was the site of the old Welcome Hotel, which was another one of the buildings that was owned and operated by the Rainier Heat and Power Company. And it was that whole block, in fact, that whole half block that included the expansion of Hanghe Park. All of those buildings that were kind of wrapping around the corner that would include the site that turned into the bank or that was redeveloped as the bank used to be wooden framed SRO buildings. That I can tell you. And they were just literally thrown up very, very quickly around the time, well, right before the regrade project.
Thanks, Marie. I knew you'd be you have in your memory bank every block and on every street in the district, so that's super helpful.
It's really scary, isn't it?
It is. Good for cocktail chatter, I guess. So we have another question from Annette Holland, who says, during the tour and now listening to the backstories, I am so intrigued and would love to see the basements and their hidden treasures. Would it be possible to tour the basements of some of these amazing SRO hotels? Obviously, we are with the pandemic right now. I don't think we can do physical tours of buildings, but let's say in the future when we opened up. Does anyone want to take this one? Or I guess it really depends on whether it's privately owned or owned by nonprofits. Yeah.
I think contact the Wing Luke Museum. They do a couple of tours, and I remember them doing a Prohibition tour once, and they came down to the basement to look at the murals. And so they used to offer a whole a wide selection of tours, and I think they used to offer one on all the jazz clubs that used to be in Chinatown as well. And so I think they would be a great person to contact and maybe suggest or see if they have something there that they can plan out.
Great, thanks, Tanya. Yeah, the Wing Luke Museum is a great resource for many things. Okay, let's see. We have a question from Mary Jean Gilman. What will be the visible legacy of Busch Gardens' original location when the development occurs? Karen, that's a whole other hour.
Yeah,
Right?
it's a whole nother. Actually, the building, the people who are doing the development there have shifted the design several times already. And the first original one was they were going to try and maintain the facade. The second version, there was a little bit of the facade still there, idea of the facade still there. And then the third most recent design that I've seen everything was completely gone. And it was, it doesn't look like the neighborhood. It doesn't, really fit the neighborhood. The facade doesn't look like it fits the neighborhood as much, as it could. So there's really not much left there at all. A small group of us have been trying to work together including Eugenia and Leslie, to think about ways of offering an alternative design or alternative to what they have designed. The 17 stories butt up against the next building, which is part of the historic district. And it just would overshadow the neighborhood. And I think, rather than, kind of feel encroaching buildings on top of the neighborhood, the International District, that it feels like we would like to see something different that more complements the neighborhood, that complements the idea of maintaining community and supporting community. So we've been trying to put together an alternative vision, but the developers, still are proceeding with their design. So we'll see where it goes.
Yes, we're not giving up yet.
Yeah.
So it looks like we have another question from Annette Holland. On the sidewalk near the Wing Luke Museum, I think, we saw purple glass tiles. Does anyone know why they are there and who installed them? So now you're talking about the prism lights. They're in the CID, and also you'll see them in Pioneer Square as well. And underneath the sidewalk, there are areaways. And so it provides light down into those areaways and into the basement. And they're historic. They're actually protected, or they should be. And sometimes you see there are holes where the lights used to be, and they've been filled in with concrete, or they're just still holes. And so it's not probably the most safe thing if you're walking around there. But generally that's what they are. If anyone else has anything to add, if you know more. And I know they are expensive to replace because you can't just buy these anymore and plop them in. And have the new ones made it's quite costly.
Great.
They're purple. I'm just gonna contribute. I know they're purple because the glass lacks a special ingredient that was added later in the 20th century for glass making, but they're old and they lack that material, and it turns purple for that reason.
Great, thank you for that info. Great. Let's Stephanie Johnson Tolliver asked about the Bucket of Blood murals.
Yes, so we're in the process of, we have an amazing conservator who lives on Grays Harbor and travels in to conserve these murals. Because of COVID, it's been a little tough, but we're hoping within the next year or so that we'll be able to pull back the curtains to that window you see there on 7th and King. So people could actually look down and see the murals, see Club Royale sign, and see the 13 different figures dressed in their fur coats and top hats descending down the stairs into the jazz club. So hopefully within next year, you'll be able to see them. There are a couple other jazz club murals down the basement, but unfortunately only residents of the building can see them. But we are working to preserve those next after the murals from the street.
Great, thank you, Tanya. And I see that on the chat. There's some really great information on the chat, really wonderful comments and some info. And Mimi from the Wing Loop mentioned that the Wing currently does a virtual tour of the Yik Fong building, which was preserved and restored to the SRO era. You can check out their website for tours. A little Zoom tip in the chat box there. There are these three little dots. If you click on that, you can actually save the chat. So you can save it to your computer. And so you don't have to like, do screenshots or like, write anything down. But so I don't think there are any more questions. I want to thank all of our wonderful speakers. I want to thank HistoryLink. Shout out to Jennifer Ott, who's on this event, for helping us develop this program. Taylor, thank you, and Naomi, thank you. And with that, it's 6:01. That's pretty good, huh? Thanks again, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
Taylor.
Yeah. Bye. Bye.
Oh, sorry.
I forgot about that part.
What part?
I was going to talk about some upcoming programs for Historic Seattle. I totally spaced on that. Anyway, you can go on our website.
Well,
Thank you.
This was,
Thank you.
nice to finally meet Marie. My family ran hotels. They ran the old Bush Hotel before it was changed over too. And I ran a couple of the hotels right above where the old Hong Kong was. And it was called the Adams Hotel too, they were right next to each other.
As soon as this pandemic is over, we'll have to get together and talk. The Busch Garden has a really special memory for me because every month for 8 years, I had lunch there with a group of Japanese American gentlemen who called themselves the Main Street Gang. And
Really?
yeah, it was really wonderful. We sat at the same table in the same chairs every time we had lunch. And if anybody was at that table when we got there, everybody would just stand there waiting for them to leave because that was our place. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well,
Thank you so much. This was really great. If you all want to check the recording out, we were live streaming to Historic Seattle's YouTube, so you're more than welcome to check it out right now. And then I also recorded it on Zoom, but I have some editing to do because we were practicing early. So
thank you.
I'm going to end the meeting. This
so
was
much,
so
Taylor.
great. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Taylor.
Thanks, everybody.